Hello and welcome to Birth Time, the podcast. Following the success of our world-renowned and international award-winning film, Birth Time, the documentary, we are coming back together to explore a wide variety of topics around pregnancy, birth and postpartum. As a way of exploring topics in great depth, we will be covering one topic over several episodes, bringing you up-to-date evidence-based information from academics, practitioners and birth workers, as well as stories and lived experiences from birthing women and people and their families. We will also have interludes with people we interviewed in Birth Time the documentary, finding out where life has taken them since the creation of the film. Join your hosts, home birth midwife Jo Hunter and doula and birth photographer Jerusha Sutton as we delve deep into the world of growing and birthing babies. Hello and welcome to this next episode of Birth Time, the podcast. This is our birth trauma series, and we are very lucky to have Billie Harrigan here with us today. Billie has been serving birthing families for about 40 years as a birth companion, or what Canadians used to call the neighbour, and the rest of the world understood to be the community midwife. An educator for parents and professionals, a breastfeeding counsellor, a lay pastoral counsellor, and an integrative perinatal health consultant. She has taught midwives in 125 countries in the skills of physiological birth and is the author of the world's first certification course for becoming trauma-informed specific to the perinatal client. She is the founder of Birth Trauma Ontario, an organisation that focuses on the causes and the solutions for obstetric violence and advocates for prevention through creating alternatives to today's technocratic, medicalised birth services industry and its astounding rates of abuse and trauma. Billie has now turned her attention to training new traditional birth companions as part of this alternative so that parents have more options for welcoming their precious babies. Billie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm absolutely delighted to be here.
So welcome, Billie. We know that you have vast experience across this entire topic from all different perspectives, but both as a woman who has lived experience of birth trauma and as an advocate and an educator and a birth worker. But what we'd really like to do today, to utilise the time we have with you, because we don't have a lot, is that we'd really like to focus in on a specific area in this topic that we haven't really explored with anybody else that we've interviewed, and because you have such great experience with it, which is obviously trauma-informed care. So we spoke before, here in New South Wales, we've had a parliamentary inquiry into birth trauma, and the Select Committee have recently tabled 43 recommendations. So if actioned by the government, many of those recommendations are actually very good. Some of them do fall short, but many are, well, we could see that it could absolutely improve outcomes. So what I might do is just read recommendation 13, which is that the New South Wales government commit to trauma-informed care by funding and providing education and training to all maternity health practitioners on trauma-informed practice, including support to identify and plan care for women who have previously experienced trauma. So obviously you're the author of the world's first certified course of becoming trauma-informed, particularly in the perinatal period. So we'd love to really dive deep into this with you. Have you got anything to say about that recommendation to start with?
Trauma-informed and trauma have become a bit of a buzzword. I think for the most part, people within the industry serving have absolutely no idea what it is. And when we get these recommendations to engage in trauma-informed care or learn it, my experience has been in suggesting to people who operate in the industry that trauma-informed training should be mandatory. They look rather, startled at me and blink a few times and say, "We're fully trauma-informed." I was like, no, not so much. So it has also been my experience that I've been offering this course for, my goodness, many years now. It's been taken by students on 4 continents. There is profound resistance from industry members. profound resistance from any healthcare practitioner who works with birthing clients. It's an affront to their sensibilities. There's also the belief that engaging in trauma-informed care will add to their burden, that it will increase their workload, and that's just an untenable possibility. So the resistance is profound. I say, the recommendation, lovely. Will we see it in practice in our lifetime? I'm not holding my breath.
Okay. And so let's go there. What do you think the reason behind that is? Like, why do you feel that a lot of industry clinicians, and when we say industry, we're talking about people that work in the system, yeah? That's what we call it in Australia. I'm not sure what it's called there, but yeah, why? Why do you think that they're reluctant to engage?
Because in order to engage in trauma-informed care, they have to admit the possibility that the minimum 1 in 3, possibly 1 in 2 of their clients have been traumatized by their interactions with them. That's a really hard thing to accept, to think that they have been behaving in a manner that has created a physical brain injury in their customer, that how they interact, how they behave, how they deliver their services, and PTSD is a physical brain injury. And probably the most reasonable and possibly conservative statistic is that about 1 in 8 of the customers of the maternity services industry leaves these services with a traumatic brain injury. That's not a good outcome. But the screening for women postpartum is, do you have depression? Because the solution is medication, most often, or therapy. And that doesn't point the finger at anything except the woman's vulnerability and her weaknesses, or does she have anxiety? But to say, are you dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder? Well, there has to have been a precipitator for post-traumatic stress disorder. Where did that precipitator come from? Well, it came from her interactions in the industry. Well, now we have to look at that. And that's not a place where most people want to go. It's also, we have to look at what are our most cherished institutions in modern society. It used to be the religious institutions. It's not anymore. Now it's our medical institutions. They are now our most cherished and our most protected institutions. So to turn this and say, hey, women aren't doing well under your services is the pushback from not only those who don't want to look at it, but those outside of the industry saying, no, they're saving lives. Don't mess with that. And when they have a bad day, they're allowed to act badly. So there's a lot of protectionism around it.
And is it a factor, Billie, that, these clinicians and these institutions are so stretched? Is this a factor that they have no capacity? The people working in them feel they have no capacity to take on, anymore. I'm not saying this is how it should be, but is that a factor in it? Have we just stretched our clinicians so far that they have no capacity to take this on?
That's what they think, but no, not from my perspective. It does not take on any more. In fact, trauma-informed care benefits the clinician. It benefits the clinician in far less burnout, far fewer mistakes, more positive interactions with their clients. The clients are far more likely to participate in their own care plan. So they're not battling against that. They get engagement and they leave the day with a sense of satisfaction. Mm-hmm. So no, it is not because they're stretched too thin. It is just a culture. It's a cultural shift.
Yeah. So just at its nuts and bolts, what is trauma-informed? What does it mean?
We begin by asking a different question. We don't ask what's wrong with you. We ask what happened to you. And what happened to you tells a bigger story than what's wrong with you. And just starting from that question tends to shift the conversation. It's learning listening skills, actual active listening. I think there was golly, it's in my course, and I hope I don't quote it, but it was an interaction between a practitioner asking a client to tell them what's going on. And I think they tapped out at between, it was either 11 seconds or 18 seconds, but I think I'll have to check this. So I'm sorry if I'm misquoting the study, but they tap out at 11 seconds.
Wow.
And that's the extent of the listening that happens. So it's learning a different listening skill. And it's just a skill. You just got to learn how to do it. And then learning the skill of affective empathy. Affective empathy engages the client and draws out more communication. They get to participate. They get better faster. The clinician leaves their day feeling like they did a good job, far less burnout, fewer mistakes. So it's just a couple of them.
Okay, that's awesome. And it's kind of not rocket science, is it?
It's really not rocket science.
It's pretty simple. Yeah, okay.
It also includes a lot of other things that we would expect in any kind of medical interaction, such as client autonomy, asking permission before you do something to them. But, we know that doesn't really exist in maternity services. So I'm not going to suggest it's going to change. So that's why I say we should have an alternative. Those like that kind of service, great, it's right there. But if you don't, I think we need to create an alternative to say to this well-oiled machine that is not broken, not one little bit of it is broken, to say, although you're doing everything absolutely stellar for what you were designed to do, we think you should do it differently. Well, it's not going to happen. So we really do need to create alternatives.
It's working exactly as they wanted.
Yeah, I guess the thing about that is that, I don't know what the stats are in Canada, but in Australia, 99 or 98% of the population do go into the system to birth. So if we're wanting to do things within that system to change it for better for that 98% of people that are going there, how do we do that? Like, how do we integrate trauma-informed care into a maternity service? How do we do it? Any ideas?
You talk to the 98%, because if there's a hit on the economic bottom line of any industry, they'll change. So it's draining the money by the customers just doing something else. It's not talking to the system, it's talking to the customers. And it's letting the customers know that there is an alternative. You can create an alternative, use the service if you want it, use the service if you need it. But if you don't need it, let's create an alternative. I've discovered over these years, talking to the industry is a waste of breath. Talking to the customers makes a massive difference. Connecting with the clients, connecting with those who are having babies, finding out what their mindset is. What have they been trained to do? How has their thinking been pushed into this? What are the social disciplining mechanisms around them, forcing them into conformity, and addressing those things? And when the customers stop showing up, the service changes in a heartbeat.
So for practitioners that are listening, that are really wanting to change what they're doing, how do they have these hard discussions with the women? Like, how do you sort of go there with, let's talk about your trauma? Like, you don't want to just say, have you been sexually abused? Or, like, in your course, like, how do you help practitioners or birth workers or anyone that's working with women and pregnant people to develop ways of discussing this stuff that's safe for both them and the people they're speaking with?
The first assumption is, yes, she arrives with trauma. Yes, she arrives with sexual trauma. That's it. Baseline. Don't ask. You can if you want to. She may disclose if she wants to. The research literature is pretty definitive that women no more want to disclose this than they want to go to the police and talk about having been raped. It's not a safe option for them. If they've had a bad experience, the route of reconciliation is that the victim is to go to the physician or the midwife or the administrator or whoever created an unpleasant situation and talk to them about it. Well, that's about as realistic as saying, as a woman who was raped, let's go and find the person who was lurking in the underground garage who raped you, and let's just sit down and have a good conversation. It's not realistic. So the practitioners across the board, everybody, just assume that this woman arrives with a story. We all have one. The rates, whatever is listed as the statistic for sexual assault, most often is talking about penis in vagina. But if we're talking about a loss of dignity, sexual violation, loss of safety in her sexuality, we're looking at 100%. 100% of women have been victimized in some way throughout their lifetime based on their sexuality. And so we just start from there. We start at that point that she has been, in which case we're going to treat this person carefully, with dignity, with caution, with kindness, asking for permission, not assuming that just because there's a lab coat or a badge that they're and a pair of gloves that they have the right to penetrate her genitals. They don't. And just because the chart says, what is the dilation at this point, they still don't. So the starting place, without asking any questions at all, is just to assume you have got a survivor in front of you.
Brilliant. Brilliant. And so what are some of the healing strategies for those that are living with birth trauma?
There are many. In the earliest stages, I would say most survivors are met with what we call secondary wounding, because in our culture, and it is changing. So I'm just going back, a few years probably, to suggest that you were abused or mistreated in your birth to the general society is considered shocking and unlikely. So, did little princess not get what she wanted? Oh, well, it's not about you. You're not special. I would say many survivors are met with that. And so they learn very quickly not to talk about it. I would think most learn that. There are many healing modalities that are based on talk therapy. That's kind of a Western modality. And many women don't want to talk about it. So the approach I take, first of all, is PTSD is a brain injury. There is inflammation in the brain, is to start addressing the inflammation. And if we can address that and bring the inflammation down in the brain, thoughts become more organized, vocabulary starts to flow, the hippocampus starts to recover, the amygdala begins its recovery. And then when that inflammation is down, then the thoughts become more organized. And then there are so many healing modalities after that. It could be body work. She might want to engage in talk therapy. It might be EMDR. It could be just a number of approaches. And once the inflammation comes down, if the survivor can find somebody that she can talk to who says, okay, I get it. No gaslighting, no nothing, and just accepts what it is she says. And the story does change as the inflammation comes down. Missing pieces are added. Parts that seemed out of order start to come in order. At the beginning of a trauma narrative, there's like double the words telling the experience, and it might be with somebody who's not experiencing trauma. And so as the healing unfolds, then it becomes an organized narrative. And that's another indication of good healing. But finding somebody that you can talk to. And in this situation, peers seem to serve a really good purpose. But bringing down the inflammation, and that can be, I think, like what the research actually tells us, is taking a nutritional approach to recovering from birth trauma, getting magnesium in there, getting sunlight for vitamin D, branch-chain amino acids, omega-3 fatty acids, things that are known to reduce inflammation, and then to heal the gut, because 90% of serotonin, 70% of dopamine are made in the gut, and there is a connection between trauma and gut dysbiosis. So bringing healing to the gut helps too.
Hey there, this is Zoe Naylor from the Birth Time team. If you're new to us here at Birth Time, you might want to head to our website to learn more about our movement and mission. There you can stream the film, apply for a screening license, invest in some Birth Time merchandise, buy a gift card, subscribe to the Hub, watch recordings of our live events, or simply share your feedback. Just head to www.birchtime.world and don't forget to follow us across social media at Birchtime World. Now it's back to the podcast.
In your opinion, do you feel like there are a certain population or there are certain people that it might be more at risk of experiencing birth trauma. I mean, obviously anybody that walks through the doors of a birthing room, but within that group, is there anybody that's more at risk, do you feel?
Yes, and looking at the risk factors for trauma sometimes depends on which discipline is doing the studying. Is it the psychological disciplines doing the studying? Is the US military has produced some outstanding research on trauma and recovery from trauma. And so they've been a tremendous resource for translating it to birth trauma. There are significant risk factors for, I say that birth trauma is the intersection between escalating external adversity and diminishing internal reserves and resilience. So as the external adversity reduces and exhausts the internal resources, that's when we start to enter into that realm of trauma that impacts the brain. So if she has tremendous internal resources and tremendous resilience, and that could be because she has outstanding nutrition and her brain is resilient as can be. She has an exceptional network of people. She has been nurtured through her lifetime. She has a connection to an important person in her life that is her stability. She has these internal resources where a significant external adversity comes along and she looks at that and goes, well, you're kind of jerks, but it doesn't impact her brain. Somebody who has already had adverse childhood experiences, did not have the blessing, the gift of outstanding nutrition, does not have an anchor person in their life, has already exhausted many of their resources in overcoming sexual abuse or financial adversity or systemic racism. Those people tend to be more at risk because their internal resources have gone to so many things. And in the childbearing year, you're young. You just don't have enough years in you to have worked things out and to have recovered. If you are having babies in your 50s, then you've probably had a lot more years to have overcome early adversity and to have recovered from those things. But in our childbearing years, we just don't have the time. So having a history of those kinds of adversities does make the individual more susceptible to a traumatic injury.
It's good because, I mean, so much of the discussion around birth trauma up until recent years probably is around physical injury, isn't it? And it wasn't really acknowledged that, you know, emotional is also birth trauma. And what we found when we interviewed people for Birth Time was that there were people that had, like, if you looked at their birth on paper and read it, it was a very normal physiological birth and a healthy baby and, you know, no physical injury. However, they believed their birth was traumatic or felt traumatized by it. And often it was because of the interactions with the care providers that they were working with. So have you got anything to add to that around?
Yeah, a traumatic birth, of course, is defined by the person who experienced it. But in looking at thousands of women's narratives and those that have done some really good research on this, there are certain characteristics that help to identify whether or not it was traumatic. And that includes, was there violation of her consent, her sexuality, her identity? Was there fear for life? Well, you don't want a dead baby, do you? Was there loss of autonomy? So things were done to her, not with her, and then helplessness. And it is, in fact, that final element of helplessness that is one of the biggest triggers to take it from a crappy experience into a traumatic one. Helplessness really triggers, you know, exhausting our internal resources.
Billie, what effects does psychological birth trauma have on the mother-baby bond?
Well, this is really interesting. The research I had gathered showed that a mother with PTSD had impaired bonding, higher potential for child abuse, child neglect, that increases the potential for the child to experience adverse childhood experiences, puts the child at disability for learning, income potential, mental health problems, and suicide. A recent study that was released probably in the last few months was able to distinguish, was it actually birth trauma or was it general PTSD? Was it birth-related PTSD or general? And in fact, those with birth-related PTSD, it had the opposite effect in terms of bonding. These mothers got to their babies and held on to them and bonded deeply, because in spite of what happened, they couldn't save the baby from whatever happened at the birth, but by golly, they're on it now. So this is good news. We finally caught a break.
Yeah.
Finally.
The
but
resilience.
Yes, it does impact. Yeah. But it impacts her sleep. Any kind of trauma PTSD symptoms are often felt in the sleep. So they have more difficulty sleeping, more nightmares, more difficulty staying asleep, which impacts parenting. There's a difference in whether or not they pursue breastfeeding, because it's like, well, this is the one thing I'm going to do for my kid. Or it's like, I can't deal with one more failure. I can't do that. So there's kind of that division in how breastfeeding unfolds. Not always, but there's that potential. Mm. So yeah, it's a big impact. But the fact that it does not, in general, if it's just birth related, it does not impair the mother-infant bond. Whew. I read that. It's like, oh my gosh, we finally caught one break.
Yeah. So for anybody, are you still running your course? Is that something that's still available to people?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And is it an international? Sorry to interrupt. Is it an international?
Yes, it was written for an international audience, and it has been taken by students on 4 continents. So it is written from an international perspective. It's all English speaking. So it's English speaking research from wherever I could find it throughout the world. It is available for anybody who just wants to come to harriganhive.com or birthtraumaontario.ca or billieharrigan.com and find the course. You can sign up at any point, and it is self-directed. Well, we're in there. It's a group effort, but no time limit. But if someone is accepted into the traditional birth companion course, the trauma course goes with it, and completion of it is mandatory.
Great. Okay, so you can start it at any time. It's not like you've got a course that goes for 3 months and this is when you have to start it. You can just get on and go, okay, I'm going to jump on and do this.
Yay.
Amazing. Awesome. And is there subjects within it, or is it, how have you got it set out? Is it a, reading, listening, getting involved in actually, counselling people? What's involved in the process of the course?
It's divided into several units, and each unit has got numerous sections. Each section is specific to something to do with understanding trauma, obstetric violence, the solutions, recovery. And each section's got podcasts and videos and extra readings, and there are assignments to complete. And then in order to get a certification at the end, there is a final reflective essay.
Brilliant. Awesome. That sounds amazing. Is there a set amount of hours?
No, you can do it at your own pace. I do offer a monthly live tutorial, and we do have study hall as well, so participants can get on and talk to each other. It's a collaborative effort, so we encourage assignments to be posted in the course itself, so we can all say, wow, that's amazing, good for you. It is a very positive, very kind environment, because almost everybody who comes to it is dealing with some serious baggage and some serious injury. So it's a very gentle place. The content itself is hard. It's hard to look at a couple of decades of research from multiple countries talking about the same thing over and over and over, of abuse, violation, assault, and what many women call rape, obstetrical rape. It's a hard topic. So we have lots of breaks. We have lots of little self-care breaks in there to ensure that we're all taking care of each other, taking care of ourselves.
And have you got any resources or ideas or information for birth workers or clinicians who are themselves experiencing vicarious trauma through what they've witnessed or feel like they're complicit in?
I think before the last 4 years, before that, I think the information was 50% of midwives, and this is also specific to Australia, 50% are dealing with either full PTSD or partial from vicarious trauma, from what they've seen, as well as nurses. There's very high rate of trauma from what they see.
I'm surprised it's not higher than that.
Well, we've seen the last 4 years, so it probably is. That was prior to that. A lot of research didn't continue during the last 4 years, and I'm not sure how much of it I trust these days anyway. Again, where there's vicarious trauma, there's going to be inflammation in the brain. They have to take care of themselves. Outstanding nutrition to calm the inflammation in the brain, heal the gut, and then start, formulating their narrative. And is there somebody who can sit with them and say, I'm listening, I hear it. And from there, there's all kinds of healing modalities.
It sounds like it needs to be something that's across the board, doesn't it?
It surely does.
Yeah, gosh. Okay.
Now, Billie, you're coming out to see us later in the year for the Home Birth Australia conference, of which I will be emceeing and Jo will be presenting.
Wonderful.
So we will be there cheering you on. You're coming as one of the keynote speakers. Are you able to give us an idea about what you will be speaking on at that conference?
My topic will be talking about reclaiming birth from a culture of conformity.
Amazing.
So culture of conformity has moved us into services that are not serving us. That is creating far too much damage than it should be. And it's happening because we are entrenched in a culture of conformity. So I'd like to talk about how we reclaim birth and ditch the cult.
Amazing. Well, it's always a beautiful conference. It's an incredible weekend.
Okay, so is there anything else that you would like to share with us?
I think, trauma-informed care is not hard and it's not rocket science, but it is taking a different perspective that nobody really needs to be traumatized by the behavior of someone else. It's checking in with your own behavior, checking in with your own biases, learning a few new skills. It's just skills. And I say that trauma-informed care is as crucial as hand washing. Hand washing saves lives. So does trauma-informed care. One of the, not necessarily the leading cause at the moment, but it has, risen and fallen in various countries. But in resource-rich countries, suicide is a leading cause of maternal mortality in the first year postpartum. And this is highly correlated to trauma, which is profoundly influenced by how she was treated. So if you put that together, if she's being treated like a necessary but in the way vessel, where things are being done to her, where she really has no say, and the possibility of that is suicide because she's suffering so much from it. We really have to rethink what it is we're doing to women and rethink, should women even be doing this themselves?
So we're ending with the same question for everybody that we're interviewing, which was also the same question we asked in our documentary, which is, in your opinion, what would it take for all women to emerge from their births physically well and emotionally safe?
An entire change in birth culture and an alternative to what exists today, because the current system is not broken. It's doing exactly what it was designed to do. So it's a shift in culture where women seek different options and we provide them for her by creating something with a different foundation. A foundation where the ultimate goal is to ensure more babies arrive safely and gently from healthy, empowered, non-traumatized mothers. That should be the foundation. the current maternity system's foundations, goes back, 300-400 years. And it was built on its objective was to co-opt and control women's physiology for power and profit. So that's the root, and what we see is the fruit. So we have to create something with a different root. So it produces different fruit.
That's a fabulous place to end it. Thank you so much for coming on to speak to us today. And we very much look forward to seeing you in person in November on the Sunshine Coast.
Thank you. I cannot wait. We are going to have so much fun.
Yes, we are.
And that's a wrap. You can check out the show notes to find websites, books, research articles, social media handles, and general information about each of our podcast guests. Thank you to our fabulous birth time sisters, Zoe Naylor and Selena Scoble, for supporting the creation of this podcast behind the scenes. If you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to follow or subscribe to Birth Time the podcast. Leave us a review and a rating, and please, we'd really love it if you'd share it amongst your friends and networks. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Birthtime World, and our website birthtime.world, where you can also stream and watch our international award-winning film, Birthtime the Documentary. You can find out more about me, Jo Hunter, and my midwifery work at midwifejo.com.au, and more about Jerusha Sutton and her gorgeous photography and doula work at jerusha.com.au. And thank you to you, our beautiful Birth Time family, for tuning in to Birth Time the podcast. We really do appreciate you all so, so much. Until next time.